Welcome back, everybody, to Value Adds Value. My name is Kyle Krieger, joined by my guy, Wilkie V. Law III. Will, what's happening?
Not a lot, man. Excited to feel rested.
Yeah.
This is a break that I can honestly say that I've shut everything out. I haven't answered an email. I haven't checked a message board for anything. I haven't done any of my doctoral studies. I took a break from everything for 2 whole weeks, and it feels amazing to be able to have the clarity of mind, to be able to, really re-engage things the proper way, I feel.
That's a great way to say it. So we are recording this on New Year's Eve. It is officially the last day of 2020.
Last day of 2020.
I'm hoping that somehow magically tomorrow it'll be like Groundhog Day, where we'll wake up and it'll be like 2020 never happened. But it's been great. We're pumped though, because we've been talking on the podcast the last few weeks, and Wilkie and I, in our private conversations, that we've had this sort of real desire to start to see the big picture, because it's never something that I've been really interested in, is to see the big picture of education, because I always associated that with administration and decision makers. But we are pumped to have our friends Jen Newton and Mira Williams to come back on the podcast to talk about their experience this fall of being teacher professors in the teacher prep space and all that jazz. So ladies, thanks for joining us early this morning.
Thanks for having us. It's good to see you both.
It's good to see you. So, I mean, if you don't mind, do you want to just kind of give everybody an update from, of kind of what the fall looked like for both of you? We decided we talked sometime late summer, so let's just give kind of an update for our listeners as to what your falls have been like.
Go ahead, Jen.
Mine was we had vastly different experiences. So I'll go first because mine was pretty structured. So my university started out as with the whole semester remote. So I knew going in that I was preparing for my courses to be remote, and that my students would not have field experiences. And so there was a pretty big shift in the way that we were approaching it, but it was set. It was going to be structured that way from the entire semester. So it was a pretty big learning curve in terms of thinking about how to structure it. I had 32 students, undergrads, in a section in a 3-hour block. So thinking about like, what's the attention span? How long can we be? So I broke them into 3 groups, and we met for an hour a piece, and we did a lot of like individual meetings and small group meetings. So it was just a lot of that. But the students in general, it was hard. It was just really hard. They were mostly here in town and on campus, and we were ravaged by COVID throughout the fall. We had lots and lots of extended illnesses, family illnesses, lots of, competing responsibilities. So it was an incredibly difficult semester. And then also the students my students who, I'm just talking about my undergrads. My graduate students were a whole other kind of complexity. But my undergrads were not assigned mentor teachers. And so their field experience was all videos and sort of it was just incredibly hard. And so that was challenging for the students, because like we were saying, a lot of our favorite things about teaching weren't happening, right? So they were in class and they were doing homework, but they weren't having any experiences with students. They weren't actually teaching lessons. They weren't getting those hands-on opportunities. So that was really a test of all of our kind of commitments and creativity. Mira's experience, on the other hand.
Yeah, mine was a little different. As you were talking, Jen, I was thinking, I felt like I was kind of a ping pong ball, right? Like we were just like everywhere because we opened. So I had my first class, actually both of my classes, in person. I had my N95 masks they supplied us with, our face shield. They had plexiglass. I could barely breathe. We had, to spray down the classroom. Students come in. I had not enough seats for students. Like even thinking back to it right now, I'm like getting anxious again because it was scary. And the students also, I think, I had a couple students come to me or write to me after class and say, I'm really sorry, but I don't know anything you said. Like I don't remember anything during class because I couldn't pay attention because I was too nervous about how close I was sitting to the next person or whatever I was doing. So we did that for a week. We were shut down. I think it was actually a little bit less than a week into the semester because our COVID numbers just skyrocketed. And then we took, I think it was about a month off to move to virtual. And then some professors started going back in person, and then some stayed virtual. I luckily was given the opportunity to stay virtual, which, again, like Jen was saying, has some pros and cons, right? I felt safer. My students felt safer. It was a really quick pivot of, oh, let me change my syllabus. Let me change my activities. Let me change how I'm going to do, this group work. I need to change a couple projects because we can no longer do what I had planned. So it was really interesting. And I think, for my students that were sophomores and juniors that I was having for the very first time in my program, I usually have students multiple times throughout the program. It was particularly challenging because they didn't really know me. I didn't know them. It's hard to get to know a black screen. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been really interesting and challenging.
I think about that, what you're saying, because I'm a mentor this year, and my mentee and I were talking, and I shared with him, I say, this is probably the worst year for a first year teacher. Mm-hmm. And he's been, for the entire first semester, he was completely virtual. And so you can imagine the stress and the anxiety that comes with being first year teacher, trying to get your footing, and you're virtual. So now you having to learn your students without being able to connect with them really. And it's kind of interesting. And I guess from your standpoint, looking at in the teacher prep space, how can we prepare teachers for that? Like what could that look like? Like, I'm just, like I say, I told him, I said, you're the most courageous guy on the planet, because I don't think I would have opted to be in the teaching space in the middle of a pandemic as a first year teacher, because the first year is your most difficult period. And then when you compound it with the fact that now you're having to navigate a space that no one else has done, even experienced teachers were flopping, with the virtuals. So how can we get teachers, those first year teachers, those pre-service teachers in the right mindset for what for what's going on?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's weighing heavily on us, because I think we're at a moment that will likely, in reflection, be when everything changed as educators. I think we know now that there are other ways. There are some kids who are absolutely flourishing, right? Who are finding this to be such a refreshing and accessible way to learn. And there are some kids who aren't. There are some teachers too, right? Who are really finding this to be more palatable. we are going to see a change, I think, in the way that we deliver education, and that our students need to, and we talk about this a lot, they also need to be adept at navigating virtual spaces. But the thing about it is that the tech isn't pedagogy. So, continuously talking about whether or not you can navigate Seesaw is not the same as knowing what to do with it when you can do it. So engaging students doesn't really change. We just have to think about the ways in which our pedagogy shows up. And I think that's a real challenge for students who don't know what pedagogy is yet, nor have they identified their own identity as educators and really thinking about their space. So when we think about teaching, and then we think about how to do that in a virtual space, but they don't have that luxury, right? They have to navigate the virtual space with the realities of education all at once. And they're also learning that they don't know how to learn like this. The students that I have that struggled the most, we always have. I think one of the things people don't understand about our job often is that all the student support that y'all have to provide, we also have to provide to our students, right? We have to make accommodations. We have to support them. They have real lives outside of class, and they're super complex. And our part of our role is to partner with them in helping them navigate that. We always have a couple of students who are confronted with really challenging semesters. And this semester, it was probably a third of my students, whereas normally it's 2 or 3. And the work of helping them to understand their, the role that we have as educators, that they have as learners. They're trying to figure out how to do time management, which a lot of our students struggle with already. And then not having class, not having the opportunity to just like come into my office and sit down and work. We both do a lot of like what we call mediated office hours, where our students can just come in and sit at a desk in our office and they can work. And they can ask us questions but typically if they're just sitting there, they're like feeling more confident in their abilities. So all of those things are all happening at once, right? They're learning about themselves as learners and then thinking about how to teach like this. And I think it's really complicated. I think Mira and I have both had a lot of really hard conversations with students who are like, I don't know if I want to do this. And I think educating is going to look a lot different. I think I'm worried. I guess I'll just say that. I'm worried.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when that point of technology and pedagogy, like I have 10 years of experience and I'm having a hard time finding the right pedagogy for the technology, especially because, my school is doing we were hybrid. Now we're all virtual, at least for the time being, but it's like you have 20 minutes a day for a video and then maybe another 15 to 20 minutes for an assignment. And when I have my kids live, I only have my kids live twice a week for 30 minutes. So, I mean, in that case, I can't imagine, like, it's really hard to find pedagogy that really fits that. And then and this is something I would love to hear from you. It's kind of what you were saying about kids not wanting to get into the profession because it's so hard right now. Like, then you have the thing where you're like, how much more can I do? Like, I know I could really push myself a lot harder, but then at what point do I burn out and I have experience?
Yeah.
I think going back to what you were saying in terms of how do you get students want to stay with it, right? How do you get them to understand that we still need educators, right? We have to keep doing this. One of the classes I taught this fall, and I teach it every fall, but it's called Issues and Trends in Inclusive Early Childhood Education. And our issues and trends this semester were quite different than what we typically might have. And one of the things that I started doing was I started reaching out to past students, and I started bringing them in for our Zoom calls and getting them to talk to our future teachers about what they were doing, because I felt like I could model to an extent in terms of what I was doing with Zoom and with different, learning tools, but it was nowhere near what these past students of mine who were actually in classrooms could share, right? I had some sharing how they had set their living room up as like a preschool circle center, and others who were more hybrid and they were able to show how they were coming into the classroom each day, and then still others who were in person and they were able to talk about, what it was like to have 4-year-olds wear masks all the time, and just how everything's changed. So I found that to be one way that I kind of, I don't know, got my students to buy in a little bit, I guess. Like, look, there's people doing this, you can do this. um yes, it looks different, but here's all of these different ways that they are making it happen.
I would love to come back to the point you made, Mira, about the student who sent you an email after class and was like, "I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you talked about," because of that feeling of anxiety. So with that, I mean, because Will has been, I've not taught on campus one day all year. There were teachers that were hybrid until Thanksgiving, but my school decided to do one teacher from each content area would be the strictly virtual teacher. So that was me. But I know from the anxiety perspective, like I took the virtual position because I'm like, I've got a wedding coming up in 2 months. And all I could think about was it's going to be the last week of October and that cough is going to come to me. And then we're going to have to cancel our wedding. And for me, that's just one example of what anxiety looks like. And we know our K to 12 kids have anxiety like that, but what has it been like for those students, either that have been on campus with you or just generally those college students? What does some of the anxiety look like for them?
It's so hard. And Mira's students, some of them have been in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they're not going to class, they have been in classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
If the schools are open and allowing it, my dean was like, absolutely no early field. So we had student teachers, which we call professional interns, in classrooms if the classrooms were meeting in our region. Well, I live in a very rural part of Southeast Ohio, and so we have erred on the side of caution. I think we don't have very many beds. So we have tried to keep our students out of it, but the number amongst the students has been very high because they live together, they eat together, they sleep together, they're always together. So that has been really challenging to navigate there. And, much to everyone's chagrin, they get sick. This idea that if you're young and healthy is just not accurate. They get very sick. And I had 2 students out of my 32 who were hospitalized this fall. So, this isn't sort of flippant for our students either. So the anxieties have been really high. And I think as we enter into the spring, I think about how the trauma that we've all collectively experienced, and then how I know they want to be in the field and I know they need to be in classrooms, but I know that's also going to be an additional stress for them in thinking about how to navigate this. We're pretty low on the list of the vaccine schedule. So I'm just not sure how this is going to look this spring. I think the anxieties are probably a lot more amplified than they were in the fall, because in the fall, I think we were under the impression that they'd bounce back, and be like a bad cold. And that's not the experiences that many of them have had. So,
yeah. And I think also for me, it's been really interesting because I've always been right about individualized instruction, even at the college level. I've never in my life felt like I needed as much individualized instruction this semester. Like it's just been, and I think a lot of it comes down to what the anxieties of students are, right? So I have some students, like the one I mentioned, that are so nervous about being around people that they can't even focus, right? But then I also have another set of students that are super anxious because they're worried about taking a teaching job without having classroom experience, right? So what I found really, really interesting was I had this group of students that they wanted to be in the classroom. They wanted to be in person. They're, how am I going to ever do this on my own if I don't have these experiences? I'm about to graduate. I haven't had enough time. I haven't had enough experiences. Versus the group of student that's like, please, please find me a placement that's all virtual. And it was really hard because we have usually 4 different districts that we use, and they're all doing completely different things. They all have different rules in terms of what students can do in terms of coming in or having to stay out. So I don't know. It's just been super interesting to me.
That anxiety about not having enough time in the classroom is so real.
Yeah.
We lost Will.
Oh, I think he'll come back.
Okay.
Oh, he just said the power surged at his house and something kicked him off his computer, so he'll be back. But
okay.
I mean, I feel like anxiety, and and I will say where I live in Minnesota and around, where I grew up in Wisconsin, there's a healthy population of people that are totally averse to anything COVID related. They are not, we did a survey, my school, like 60% of the parents wanted every kid to be in school all day, every day. And that's been challenging. But I just think back, and this is something we talked about with you before, and Wilkie and I have talked about, and I know from my experience, I know when I was a pre-service teacher that I didn't get as much field experience as I would have wanted. I was under prepared, and that's just the way the situation goes. But now you're sitting here saying, like, you can't go out and even, observe a classroom. So when you were saying that pre-service stuff was videos, that means they were watching pre-recorded videos, or they were watching live Zoom classes?
Both for me.
Yeah, we didn't. My my early field students did not have any live. They didn't have mentor teachers, so they weren't in connection with any live teaching. We were using Atlas, which is the national board certified library that when teachers do their national boards, they have to upload certain videos, and those videos become part of this Access library. My program is a K-12 special ed program, and there are like 6 special ed videos, and they're not maybe what we would want our students to experience in terms of inclusive education, targeted and individualized instruction, that kind of thing. So it's pretty challenging, especially when you think about a K-12 band. Like, what even is that? Why do we have a K-12 license? How do you prepare someone for the K-12 span? So that obviously really limits the amount of experience that the students can get when they're using videos. And that Mira and I were talking about this earlier, we have had multiple pitches. This is another area that I think we're going to see change from, like Sim School and other virtual and AI kind of programming that's really targeted to simulate classroom experiences and kind of gaming education, like gaming prep. And that is a whole thing that's cropped up. And I did research on this. There's a Teach Live Institute that is kind of pretty prevalent across a lot of universities. It comes out of University of South Florida, but this is a different kind of thing. It's privatized, it's monetized, it's a for-profit company where the lessons are are sort of embedded, and the students have to get in there and select, and you as the professor can decide sort of what the quote unquote behaviors are. And there are lots of problems with the way that it is set up from the perspective of a teacher educator. So we're going to see lots of those kinds of things that are cropping up that are going to create opportunities for teachers to be prepared virtually without having them access students and classrooms and teachers. So, and this is, I mean, we've seen this, right? We've seen this kind of privatizing of prep and really thinking about how to fast track and create alternative opportunities for students. But I think after the pandemic, we're seeing much more of this kind of teaching as a gig economy, where we have fast prep, quick licensure to prepare teachers for real short stints and not really investing in career educators. I think that's been on the horizon. It's been, a sort of a small little piece of it, but it's definitely creeping in and going to be a much more prevalent part of our landscape.
Wilkie's going to tell you about his favorite billboard right now. Do you remember that billboard you see everywhere in Texas?
The one that says, want to teach? No, got a degree, want to teach?
When can you start?
When can you start?
All over Texas if you drive for their programs that are like that. And we should clarify that Will was an alternative certification teacher. And I have met a ton of people who have gone through that alternative pipeline that are fantastic. But they're fantastic because they had and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of that was like people with real world experience in the professions can learn how to teach and bring that experience into the classroom is how it started, not as, like you said, a fast tracked spot.
Yeah, I'm actually not against alternative prep. I have a 1-year master's program. I think it's not enough, but for people who have degrees, they can do 1 year of pedagogy and methods and assessment and that kind of stuff and get a teaching license in special education. I'm not opposed to alternative cert. What I'm talking about is alternative cert is a really big term for lots and lots and lots of different things that fit under it, right? So what we have now, even with TFA, Teach for America, or the New York Fellows, like all of those programs, there's still a bit of a structure to it. At most states, you can, send your degree, your transcript to the State Department of Education, and they'll say, here's what you need in order to meet our licensure requirements. Those kinds of bureaucracy things are one thing that we can talk about, whether or not those things are comprehensive, whether or not they're meeting the need of the moment. But then there's another part of it that's like, what do teachers actually need? What do we know from the literature? What do we know from the research? What do we know from the lived experiences of teachers? Where, like Kyle, you said, you went through a traditional program and didn't feel prepared, right? Our students have a ton of field experience. Both my program and Mira's program are pretty heavy on the clinical hours in comparison to. Do we know that more clinical hours mean better prepared teachers? There's a tipping point, right, where there doesn't show difference once you've kind of reached a point, but more is always better. Obviously, that's how we sort of look at it, right? More experiences are better. Every single time I've been in this field for 20 years, every single time I'm in front of a new class, I have a new learning experience as an instructor and as a learner myself. So all of those things are factors. I think I'm thinking much more about the privatized model of the kind of Khan Academy version of teacher prep, where you watch some YouTube videos, you play a sim classroom game for a certain number of hours, and then you have a license.
Okay.
I'm thinking about it more. So I don't even think alternative is the right word for that, right? I think we're talking about how do we get people into classrooms for 1 year, 2 years with no real investment in their career as educators. And that's been happening. We have had that experience. That's how TFA was founded on it, right? This idea that you really just need people to be invested for a short period of time. But I think that's going to really explode as we go forward. And there's a lot of things that have happened in traditional prep and in the underfunding of higher ed that is resulting in our students being younger and graduating quicker. And so they're going into classrooms now when they're 20 and 21 and thinking about their readiness in terms of just developmental and maturity and all of those kinds of things for a career. I think we're headed for a little bit of a mashup.
I could not imagine being 21 years old going into the classroom. 20-year-old Will in the classroom, I don't believe would do anybody's child any good. I'm just being honest. I know things have changed, but yeah.
You know what hasn't changed, Wilkie?
Kids.
21-year-olds. 20-year-olds.
Yeah. I was 20, 28 or 29 when we met, and I was a mess at 29. And the bigger problem, and this is something Will talks about all the time, and we know the academic and the economic costs of teachers who only stay in the classroom for a year or two or three.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's devastating. And honestly, that's like the genesis of where our whole podcast and our whole organization started, was like, how do we get new teachers past that third year to stay in the profession? And the other thing that I would want to ask you too, from this perspective, maybe we talked about it last time, but to me, it feels like being a career teacher, like the job you do is just teach in the classroom. Like when I was growing up, I had a lot of my teachers taught my parents. Like that's how long they had been in the classroom. But it feels like to me that so many of the young teachers that I meet are already like, I'm getting my master's at 24 and I'm moving on to special ed director, and I'm moving on to behavior specialist, and I'm moving on to administration. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how, I mean, do kids think it's that bad to be a teacher? Is that what it is, that these new teachers, the pre-service teachers, are like, why would I want to stay in the classroom? Like, I can't figure that part out.
I'm going to jump in, but Mira, I want you to respond to that too. I think it's the exact opposite, Kyle. Our students are pumped to be teachers. They love it. They love everything about it. They're all about the school supplies, the kids, the books, they're excited about teaching, the job, and the toxic workplace is what gets them. We try really hard to equip them. I teach a classroom ecology class, and this semester was the first time that we created this class into our sequence. And it's very much like a precursor to Mira has a class like this too, where it's the 2-part classroom management. And in the first part, we do all tier 1. We talk about how to build relationships, why it's important for teachers to be well-regulated, that they're not escalating kids, and really focusing on our own self-regulation and our own emotional wellness, which I've never done before. I've never built that stuff into a course. And this semester, I was like, this is the stuff you need actually to be ready for that next behavior class, which is much more tier 2, tier 3, FBAs, BIPs, right? All that. But at the tier 1 level, we know teachers are always telling us, everyone says relationships are everything, but no one tells you how to do that, or what that looks like, or how to take care of yourself. I've never talked to my students before about how to make sure that they are taking mental health days. I have colleagues who are like, you can't just, when our students have a bad breakup and don't come to class, and they're like, you can't just do that when you're a teacher. I'm like, you absolutely can and should. Please take good care of yourself, because we're factors in our classroom. If your classroom isn't functioning well, if it's that you have to look at yourself and what you're asking of your students and look at your environment. It's not all in the kids. And all of those pieces are me trying to shore them up for the workplace, because we don't talk about that enough in schools, right? We're not telling teachers in schools how to take good care of themselves and how to create community that is responsive to each other. And that's the kind of thing that burns them out. And I think that Mira and I talk a lot to our graduated students who are now actively teaching. And sometimes we are in group texts where we're just saying to them, yes, your feelings are valid. That is really hard and really frustrating. And that kind of community is what we have to create in schools if we want to really invest in career educators. Mira, what would you?
I would audit your class right now if I had the chance, because what you described is the exact circumstances of Wilkie and I meeting. Personally, I was a mess, but I had this misconception that it was all of my school stresses that were causing me home stresses, when it was the opposite.
Yeah, yes. And yes, I think that is really hard. We are this grind culture and this like constant productivity. I think Wilkie's earlier point about really taking a break over break, that is not our culture. We teach teachers to have their teacher bag with them 24/7, and to always be working, because your kids have nothing. Your school provides you with nothing. Their entire future hinges on the activity that you have planned. You have to constantly be saving them, and nobody's talking about how to save yourself, right? So that and I've honestly learned that from engaging in this sort of broader teacher community, that I have to be more actively teaching them to really put themselves as a factor in their own wellness, because dysregulated adults dysregulate kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think also just talking to them about all the mistakes I made as a first year teacher, like don't stay at school until it's dark outside, like
Yeah.
take time. And then we also talk a lot about finding your people, like finding your people that you can not vent to in terms of the teacher negativity talk that can happen in, the faculty lounge or anything like that, but finding your people, kind of like what Jen was saying on our group text, right? Finding your people that can validate, like, yes, that is frustrating, or yes, not everybody has been prepared to think inclusively about children, right? Like, yes, you're still going to face that, right? You're still going to have colleagues that try to push you and knock you down and tell you that everything you've learned in your teacher prep program is not valid or doesn't work in the quote unquote real world, right? We get a lot of that. But giving them spaces and kind of like Jen was saying, teaching them how to find those spaces, but then also cultivate those spaces so that they can kind of continue them. And that's kind of, I think, a lot of the stuff that, really more Jen than me on Instagram, right? Like creating that space for people to come together and have those conversations and find your people.
I think too, I was thinking, Kyle, about your original question. I think one of the other issues with this is that we so deeply devalue career teachers. There's a broad devaluing of our profession, but the older a teacher is, the more dismissive we are of them. Which is wild, right? There's like this sweet spot of past 5 years, but less than 15 years when you are considered an expert teacher. After that, then we see you as being stuck in your ways or old school or, right, whatever those terms are. And that that's not true. It's a really problematic narrative. I'm reading everything I'm reading. I just finished this book called The Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I talk about this book all the time, but I've been really curious about the privatization and sort of how the Republican Party primarily has sort of come out against public education and what that's rooted in and how we got here. And this book kind of created a lot of clarity for me in a lot of these things, but this issue of career teachers and how they've been vilified, right? That unions, the dismantling of educational unions is rooted in the idea that they're protecting these old problematic teachers, and that tenure is a way to kind of create a space where teachers don't have to continue to learn and grow and like evolve because they're protected. And that's a really problematic narrative. Like, would you want to stay in a career that's going to dismiss your expertise and your lived experiences after a certain point?
Right.
So I think we also have to really look at, is it age, is it duration in the field, or is it our structure of continuously telling teachers there's this flashy new thing that only sits on the shelf after that, right? So a teacher asked me recently about my experience with Second Step, which is a social emotional program curriculum. And I said, I see Second Step in so many closets. Like, I don't know what it looks like in implementation, but I know a lot of districts bought it. And that creates in teachers who are active learners the belief that whatever comes up is going to last for a hot second, but what they need within them to continue to do what's best for their students is going to come from them, not from some external source. But we're super dismissive of career teachers. So I think that's another part of it, is like our early career teachers are often thinking about how do they resist becoming that teacher? How do they persist in the field without becoming stagnant?
Can I just add this though? Is it some kind of way perceived though, that old adage that says you can't teach an old dog new tricks?
Maybe.
Because a lot of, I know that when I was a skills specialist, my most difficult teachers to work with were those veteran teachers who didn't want to try new things. Who said, oh, that's a bunch of malarkey. Nobody's going to pay attention to that. Students don't need that. I know what students need. So do those teachers come off are they dismissed because they dismiss?
I think it's actually, I am with you. That is definitely my experience. That's definitely the experience of our early career teachers. But I think it's not about years in the field. It's about your temperament and your personality as an educator. Because I also know tons of educators who have been in the field as long as I have or longer who are like, hey, I want to talk to you about this or that. Do you have something I can read about inclusion or ableism? I never knew what ableism was. Can you teach me about it? And then I have other teachers who are like, that's not a thing. Listen, some kids aren't capable. Some kids can't cut it. Some kids aren't going to get that. So I don't think it's, and we have early career teachers that are like that too, right? So I don't think it's about years in the field. And I think we should probably pull those things apart and really talk about the dispositions of educators that are conducive to learning and seeing themselves as learners versus the years in the field. If years in the field creates that, then that's something we as education, as a field, need to address. If the longer you're in education, the less you are willing to learn, then we have something to deal with there. I don't know that I believe that, but I think that the willingness to engage in learning and seeing yourself as a learner is the key to being an effective career teacher.
Well, and I think that's why we stress that so much, right? Like, we're constantly telling our students, if you're going to be effective in this field, you need to be a lifelong learner. Like, when I write teaching recommendations for students, if I see them as a lifelong learner, I write that in there because to me, that is one of the most important pieces of being an effective educator. And I also, I talk to them, right? I talk to them about like, hey, guess what I learned when I was in my master's program? And guess what? I've learned that that's total BS now, right? Like I've had to change, right? And I talk to them about how I've had to read more and I've had to learn more and I've had to change my thinking and how important it is for them to be okay with that, right? Like to recognize, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to do better. I'm going to learn this and I'm going to do better and I'm going to be better and I'm not going to ever stop learning. I'm not going to get to a point where, like you said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? Like I'm not going to ever be that educator because I'm always going to be open. But I think it's hard because I think teachers get so much PD thrown at them that I think it's really easy to get in that mindset of, I don't want to learn anything new, right? I remember when I was in my doc program, we had a speaker come in and they were talking about how one of the biggest problems with education and keeping teachers was that we are in a field where and they had this down to more science than what I can remember, but I think it was 3 years, school districts adopt a new thing. So you never give teachers enough time to learn, to buy in before you're throwing the next thing at them, right? And I think that that's often why you get teachers that are like, I'm not buying into it anymore, right? Like I'm tired of every 3 years there's this new box of curriculum or there's this new
next big thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean I can see why it happens. It's this cycle of, instead we have to slow down. And I think that's why Jen and I are so just constantly stressing like the dispositions, like Jen was talking about, right? Like it's so much about your thinking and your dispositions, and I don't know.
Well, and that's where teaching as intellectual comes from. It's like, that's why we share what we're reading. That's why we share what we're learning, because we are learning. And we have a community of early career teachers that I mean, there are teachers in my life that I taught stuff that I no longer believe.
Yeah, me too.
And I think about that all the time. Like the harm that I did, or the potential harm that I brought forth to a child in a classroom because I emphasized a specific behavior sequence, right? I used to teach when I was early in my career. I used to have to teach pretty like white book behaviorism, and I am not a behaviorist. And you're going to have all these behaviorists in your comments telling me why I'm wrong. But I feel a lot about that. I feel a lot about that, and I want to repair that. And I want to really talk now with the teachers in our orbits about how we humanize student behavior and how we think about behavior as a function of the bigger environment. And, what am I doing that's influencing the student right now? What is the environment doing? What is that task I've asked of the student doing? How are all of these things, instead of putting the locus of control within the student? So I've grown and I've changed. And sometimes I think, Mira and I talk about this sometimes, I think I'm not even able to be in this space anymore. I don't know if my beliefs really align with what I know about education, what I know about disability, what I know about special education as a system of delivery. Can I operate within it? And I think those are some of the other big questions that as educators, we always have to, if you're constantly learning, then you're also pushing up against the boundaries of the system, right?
Absolutely.
I would like to kind of ask, because when you were talking about like the AI tech training, and as I'm remembering you talk about the trainings we had that sit in the closet and all that stuff, I think a question that I want to ask this year, and we wanted to talk to you kind of about the big picture, is the economic big picture. And I guess from your perspective, and Will on this too, how much of adopting new curriculums, adopting new training programs, having all of this stuff, how much of that is economically driven by private company?
100%.
I concur.
So I guess then the follow-up question is there a way for us to address, are there people in the education space that are trying to address that problem of the economic exploitation, let's call it what it is, economic exploitation of kids and teachers?
I think that is a byproduct of our political system, our view of education broadly as a nation. Do you believe that education, public education, K-12, is a workforce development experience or the development of a democratic citizens? That is sort of the two camps that we're in. And if you believe that education is workforce development, then that economic monetizing of the experience is an inherent part of it, right? That's how for-profit charters and even like University of Phoenix, all of those kinds of models come out of that economic perspective. If you, like me and like Mira, think that education is about the development of democratic citizens, then the small d democratic, meaning people who are in community with each other and who know how to engage in historical and contemporary conversation, right? About literature, about history, about art, about all of these things, then education looks a lot different, right? There's no benefit to a packaged model. I think the downside is that we're really far into this perception of education as workforce development. So far down that path that the outgoing administration made an effort to couple the Department of Education with workforce and labor, right? So that's telling. I'm not sure that we are going to see a swing in the other direction in the degree to which we need in order to really revise and go a different way. I think the thing I've experienced the most is that educators tend to be, and I think this is because of the administrative structure of schools, very sort of concrete in thinking about these programs, as teachers want to implement them with fidelity if they're implementing them. And in fidelity, they rarely are manageable in any way, right? And Mira and I, who we have worked for many years in educational research, and we know that the dosage at the research level is often completely unachievable in classrooms. So here's a packaged literacy curriculum. You need 90 minutes of this, structured instructional delivery every day in order to get these evidence-based results. And you're like, okay, that's cool. I have 22 minutes for the block. So that kind of stuff is problematic. And it always, it never really aligns. But the issue that I think we're going to see more of is that, like with PBIS, right? It sort of made its way in language into the law. Yet, and it's lowercase in the law. And so the PBIS Shigai model, Horner model, is all capital. But that has been sort of implemented as this is what you have to do legally. Well, it's not. And it's not even a thing. It's a framework. So when teachers are like, well, we have to do PBIS, it means different things in different districts. In implementation, it looks very different in different places. But when you only have that one lens for what your school or your district does, it's it that's how it is. So that's the model that you have. That's how I have to do it. So oftentimes we're talking about things like these packaged programs, like we're talking about the same thing, but we're not. We're not even talking about the same thing. So there's a lot of complexity in the buy-in. I also really always think about this idea of teacher buy-in as like, if I have to buy in, then you have to sell me something, right? In order for me to buy in.
I also think that, and this is something I've learned a lot about recently in higher ed anyways, in terms of money, right? Because we've had lots of budget cuts because higher ed, I mean, people
We need
are,
a bailout.
yeah, people are not paying, like they are either not coming or they're withdrawing. They don't want online, or they do, whatever it is. So I have found, and I'm pretty sure this is the same with K-12, but the way that our administrative and fiscal structures are set up are that there's certain pots of money that have to go towards certain things, right? So for example, everybody wants to know why we are all getting College of Education t-shirts and sweatshirts, but we have no money for travel, right? We have no money for professional memberships or anything like that. Well, the reason is because there's different pots of money, right? So like there's a certain pot of money that has to go towards curriculum. There's a certain pot of money that has to be used towards whatever it is. And I think that school districts are often faced with the same thing, right? They have a certain pot of money and they have to use it to buy curriculum. So they go and they're like, okay, well, what's the latest trend, right? And then they go and they purchase this curriculum. But then what I have seen is that the curriculums are so expensive. They have these curriculums, but then they don't have enough money to pay to get the teachers trained to actually use the curriculum, right? So then teachers get this box of, you guys know, right? Like this box of manuals and workbooks and all kinds of things, and they say, go have fun, or go use this, or go implement this with fidelity. And we haven't done any of the actual training or digging into what this tool is or how we can use it. And then no wonder.
Or we have one half day. We have no sustained, ongoing like problem solving.
Right.
I think that's interesting because in the PD space, one of my big issues is that there's very rarely any follow up.
Yep.
We're kind of, okay, we got the next best thing. Here you go. You got it. Now go do it.
Yep.
And there's very little. I know, like my wife's school, there's a little different because our district went to creating these demonstration schools. Starting at the elementary level and eventually moving up through all as their model, what they want the base to be. So they have these partners that they're meeting with consistently throughout each quarter that they're meeting with. If they start a project that they're doing training on, they must see that training all the way through and then provide feedback and back and forth. And I think that's a great model. But at the same time, for the other 99% of us,
yeah. Well, and that's resource heavy.
Yeah. It's very resource heavy.
So I learned how to teach like that. When my first job, I was an early interventionist, which is infants and toddlers with disabilities doing home-based service, coaching families. And then I moved into a pre-K classroom in North Carolina as a part of I had a grant. I was a model classroom for a grant in my area. And because of that, I had coaches. And I had a literacy coach. I had kind of a classroom environment coach. And they were university people who were working on a grant-funded literacy project, but I benefited because they were constantly available to me, and they came to my class and they would spend some time with me in my classroom all the time. They knew my students. Then we could meet during nap time and they would talk to me about, when you did this, you could have said this would have been a great extension opportunity, this would have been a feedback loop you could have engaged in. And they would coach me in the moment with my actual real life students. And no doubt I was a better teacher because of that. I was early in my career. I was young. I didn't have children of my own. There were lots of opportunities that they helped me learn about, how I could use books across my centers, all of these different things. And then I became a model classroom for the state. So then other teachers across the state in similar classrooms like mine would come and observe and talk to me about what I was doing and how I had things set up and all that kind of thing. And the teacher dialogue, the teacher to teacher dialogue, the research to practice dialogue, all of that investment in me, I now see was, not normal. But that to me is how we have to engage in professional development, is that like being in the learning together. And Mira and I don't get opportunities to do that. I mean, we very rarely get to have those kind of partnerships with teachers and our pre-service teachers. Sometimes we do because we have good relationships with our mentor teachers, but it's not a part of the plan. It's not built into the model. And I think the sort of movement in education is a disinvestment in that kind of human capital that you're talking about, Wilkie, and a more of an investment in the tech side that Kyle sort of brought up originally. And that the less people we need to build strong teachers, the better. So if we can create models that you can do online, and if we can put, Mira and I both are experiencing, I have 44 students in my class this spring online, because the idea is you can have as many as you can in an online environment. And that's the business model. That's the capitalism model that we're seeing in education, where the fewer teachers and the more students, the better we can maximize our profits.
Yeah, that is, I can say this from an experienced veteran teacher, that if COVID did anything, it shrunk my class size to the point to where I think my largest class was 19 kids. I have not had 19 kids in a classroom ever in my educational career. I've always had upward of, at least 25 in a sixth grade classroom. And last year, pre-COVID, we were, some of my classes were at 34 and 35 students. To have only 19 kids to work with has been a dream scenario. Granted, it's frustrating having to teach through a mask. I've had to start wearing double mask, one that's like a ventilated mask that painters wear that kind of takes the mask away from my mouth so that my projection can go out a little further. I tried the little cup thing that you can buy, but then it dug into my skin too much and I didn't like that. So, but other than that, teaching 19 kids, my smallest class is 12 kids, being able to separate those kids into small groups. Basically, I can teach 6 kids at a time. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're going from 6 in a group to having 12 in a group. It's a big difference of what you can deliver. And I mean, I'm a huge proponent of smaller class sizes. I would say, give me a shorter class time with a smaller class, and I can be just as effective as more time with more students. Because I think you can get more done. And, right. That university setting, I remember my first year in college sitting in a general studies classroom, and I turn around and it's this lecture hall, and there's like 140 kids behind me. And I'm like, oh my, how is this professor even gonna know I exist? Mm-hmm. I opted out of going to some of the bigger colleges here in Texas. I wanted to go to OU, I wanted to go to, UT. there are different schools that I wanted to go to, but I'm like, there's no way you're going to know me at these campuses. And to my surprise, when I got to Southwest Texas, because it was a teacher's college prior, it was founded on creating great teachers. Every single one of my professors knew me by name. Like they would, like you said, those intangibles where you're walking through the quad or you're sitting in a dining hall and your professor just comes and say, hey, can I sit down and have lunch? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. We got a text next week. Talk to me about, and it's like those times and opportunities that you don't get now that I feel like is, yeah, I mean, I know we're struggling, and I guess we never really think about the struggle of higher ed. I know my nephew, he struggled his first wave of virtual learning. And so he was like, look, I got to go back to school. Let me at least be there. Even though I'm virtual, let me be there. Yeah. And that made all the difference because then he was on the dean's list. You know what I mean? So he went from struggling to making the dean's list just because he was there. Mm-hmm. And that's just proof positive that kids, in that academic environment, they need the environment, the culture, that college experience. And for pre-service teachers, they need to be in classrooms. Like, to me.
I mean, we don't talk enough about we talk a lot about K-12 and like the disinvestment and, pulling resources and underfunding, but higher education is in an absolute tailspin. It's not a sustainable model with the way that it has been underfunded, and the lack of investment from our elected officials has resulted in an economic disaster. And if we believe in higher ed, I mean, I really have questions about whether or not this model will persist. And in some ways, I think that's probably good. There are lots of ways that people can get information, and lots of ways that people can learn. But I also think that we as humans, right, our developmental trajectory is just a long one. And it takes that we think about frontal lobe development. Mira and I have worked with college students now, undergrad, really traditional college students. We have non-traditional students in our graduate programs, but really traditional undergraduate students for a long time. And it is all of the things that you remember. It is also life skill development. I sit down with students and I'm like, okay, let's look at your due dates and put them in your calendar. And then let's backward map when you're going to work on it. And let's put it in here. And then also let's put in when you're going to work out and when you're going to eat and when you're going to sleep and when you're going to lay on your phone and drop it on your face and watch, YouTube videos. When are you going to watch TikTok? Like, let's talk about how to plan your life out, because they don't have those skills. In high school, their lives are super structured, right? They're very structured from the time they wake up until the time they go to bed. And then they get to college and not all of them, but some of them really struggle. So we do a lot of that with our students, right? And to your point about having smaller class size, I had 32 students in my group for 3 hours, but I broke them up and we would meet 12 for an hour, 12 for an hour, 12 for an hour. I did the same thing 3 hours in a row with a different group, which isn't awesome, right? Because for me, it's like, okay, I've already talked about this. But for them, it gave us a space to all be on the same screen, to be able to talk, to get to know each other. We were in the same groups. And I think Mira did this too. I would obviously do a lot of individual sessions, but I also had open coffee hours and where students could just pop in to Zoom. Sometimes they're like, I want to know more about your tattoos. And I'd be like, all right, well, we'll talk about tattoos for a little while. Or I want to know more about what it was like when you lived in St. Louis, or I want to know more, just chat. And so all of those things were important because different people need different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is going to come up out of the students that you're going to be getting here over the next couple of years after this pandemic?
What do you think it's going to look like? I mean,
I'm worried because I feel like, so with my group, my first group, they're not first years, but they're either sophomores or juniors. By now, I have developed such a strong relationship with them. And I'm going to have them again in the spring. And I'm worried because I don't know how I'm going to go from blank screens to more blank screens to then the relationships that I have with my graduate students and my seniors, right? So I'm worried. Like, I'm really like trying to figure out how can I get them to trust me? How can I build these relationships when I know that here we go again, right? This is not there. I mean, I know that we are hoping there's an end in sight. I think there's a lot of hope with 2021 coming, but, and I don't want to sound super negative, but I just don't have as much of that like positive hope that the spring's going to be totally different, because I just don't know what it is.
I also think like that as we think about going forward to the students who aren't in college yet,
Yeah.
the students we're recruiting, Mira and I talk a lot about how our doctoral preparation did not prepare us for the work that we do. And I will say that one of the things that I did not know was a part of my job would be recruitment and retention. Obviously, retention is important to me because I'm invested in my students, as is Mira. But recruitment and retention, we work in a business, and we thought we were educators and that the students would show up, but they don't unless we invite them. So connecting with faculty and having a relationship with faculty is actually really important for college recruitment. And so we both do a lot of high school events. We talk to high schoolers. Right now it's a lot of Zoom, but my university does something called Green Carpet Days, where students come in and they with their parent or whatever, and they have a whole day that's dedicated toward recruiting them to come here, and they spend time with me as a part of that. It's 20 minutes, but I talk to them about what our program looks like, but also like coming here, living in Athens and being in our building, and what their course sequence will look like. But the university has changed their admissions policies because of our reduction in student numbers, which is happening across higher ed nationally. So now if they have 30 credits of AP or college credit plus, and a certain GPA, then they're automatically admitted. So what we're seeing, and what is going to continue to be a factor, is that what used to be my second semester sophomores is now freshmen. So this coming spring, my courses, the course that I'm teaching are typically second semester sophomores. It's the very beginning of their education coursework. And now I have a whole cohort of freshmen in that group. That's going to continue to happen, where instead of a 4-year program, Mira just went from a 5-year program to a 4-year program. And that program is probably going to eventually be down to 3.5, right? So all of the compression that's happening, yes, because IDLS is going to end up being, yes, I'm telling you, it's coming for you.
Don't say it. Do not say it.
So my 4-year program is now, for some, 3, and 3.5 for a lot of students. So we're also having, I was telling Mira when we were talking earlier, like, what are we racing toward? Because developmentally, and for our students, IDEA, Part B of IDEA covers students from 3 years old to 21 years of age. And the students that I'm graduating are the same age as the students they may be teaching. And developmentally, I have a lot of, concerns about that. But I'm also reminded that we invest in students for the long haul, right? We have 15 weeks, and all we can do in that time is prepare them to continue to learn. So when I write letters of recommendation, like Mira was saying, or I talk to future employers, I always say that they're ready to begin learning on the job. We have prepared them to begin. There is no teacher preparation, even in its best version, is not a career product, a teacher product, right? We aren't creating teachers who are ready to go out and bust down doors. They're just ready to try to persist in the classroom environment. And I think we have to be a lot more clear about that teaching is a developmental process, just like everything else. We get better at it over time, but then things change. I mean, do I ever feel like I'm going to be like, I can pull out last year's syllabus? It hasn't happened yet.
You know, I like the question that you posed was, what are we racing towards? What is the rush? You know, and I think it goes back to that the capitalist system we're in. It's about finances. Yeah. Everybody's trying to make them, and everybody's trying to save them. And it's very difficult to do both of those things at the exact same time. And in the midst of all of that, I guess my big wonder is, are we putting out less prepared individuals into the workplace than we should? Because as we said, a 21, 22-year-old teacher, you go into a high school where you're teaching 17, 18, sometimes 19-year-olds. To me, that's just way too close in my view of, of where, I was 18 years old as a senior in high school. If I had a teacher who was 21 years old, how is your life experience any different than mine that you're going to really get me, and not saying that there are not 21-year-olds who are not completely mature. I love having conversations with my nephew who just turned 21, but it's me talking to a 21-year-old.
Well, and I think about colleagues, right? So that they're also your colleague. And I think there are definitely issues that we can talk about in terms of peer relationships and student relationships and the power dynamic and all of that. But I also really think a lot about how their colleagues view them when they are early career teachers. Because when I was preparing teachers with Mira at JMU, our students were 22, 23, because it was a 5-year program. They had the master's in the art of teaching at the completion and dual license, and they just had more time. And they were, we're still in communication with a lot of them, and they were just more ready. I know that's like a impression, but for me, they felt more ready. In that period of development, that year or two is a big deal. And I think about how their colleagues perceive them, how we already perceive early career teachers or first year teachers. And then, when they're so young, and it's hard it's hard for them. It's a very high stress job for that transition. I'm seeing, like I said, we have a 1-year master's program, and I'm seeing so many students who graduate early who are joining our master's program. We went from like 30 some students in there to like 55, 58. I mean, it's growing super quickly. And a lot of them are graduates from our undergrad prep program in early childhood or in AYA. And then they're adding the special ed license because it gives them a year. And I think particularly in this moment, so back to Kyle's question, all of those things are happening with or without the pandemic. right? All of the things with compression and this automatic admissions and all of that. But then we think about these students who are our juniors and seniors who have had these remote years or this like back and forth hybrid virtual, and then what college will feel like for them, I think is another big question mark that we're going to have to contend with going forward. I think if this persists past spring, we're going to be hurting significantly because I do not see this year's seniors signing up for college like this. A lot of I've talked to a lot of my students who are contemplating taking a gap semester, a gap year. We're really reworking a lot of people's plans because it is very hard to learn like this. So I don't imagine that seniors are going to want to pay college tuition to have this environment. So I'm hopeful that we can get back to some semblance of our work. Maybe it swings the other way though, right? Maybe this experience has created such a bad taste in folks' mouths that we'll see a shift back to more traditional, I'm not a traditional person, but more of that like embedded classroom time together and in the prep scene and less of the I'll just sign up for a module.
Well, and I think about the conundrum that these kids who are graduating this spring and administrations who are trying to hire new teachers. Like, so you're a brand new teacher trying to get your first job, but you didn't student teach in a classroom. And you're an administrator or a hiring team trying to evaluate a new incoming teacher that doesn't have the opportunity, that doesn't have the opportunity to really look at someone and say like, hey, I definitely, I feel like I want to ask more about the temperament and disposition, but I think that might have to wait for another episode because I feel like we would really, it's something that you notice, like, and you can see temperament across the room. You can see a teacher who just has the right temperament. And having the right temperament does not mean you're like laissez-faire and, like you come from Hawaii with board shorts on. It's just you have the right temperament to fit who you are. Like the way I react to certain things is not the way that Will reacts to certain things, but and I remember the time where I was that teacher who escalated, and Will can attest to this. Like I didn't have emotional regulation, and gosh, at 20, and to expect that at 21 years old. I was 25 when I moved to Houston, and I was still going out like a pretty regular amount of Thursday nights and then going to school on Friday.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, man, this is just kind of what I did. Like, hey, all right.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. And we should honor that in our early career teachers and not vilify them for it. I think that's part of it too, is like this expectation that they're grown-ups now and they're going to behave in certain ways. And Mira and I have never subscribed to that, although we are sort of outside the norm amongst our colleagues. But we expect our students are going out. We expect that they're, living complicated lives outside of our classrooms. Mm-hmm. And we should expect that and not hang them up for it. Like it is what it is. And that is the part of the developmental trajectory.
And I was going to ask too, like right at the beginning, about whether or not college kids are getting a bad rap during this time, because, everywhere in the country, you can see college parties getting shut down. And even though the kids are virtual, like you said, they're living 4 or 5 in a house. And
and to Will's point, they always do. They always get vilified no matter what. It doesn't matter what the environment is. It's always college students are the worst. But to Will's point, you know, they are here. They're living in their apartments. That seems to be better for the most part. Living at home is really complicated for them. But when we bring them here, then we should expect them to behave as they do when they're here. I mean, they're gonna go out. They're gonna, if the bars are open and the students are here, then we have said as a collective society and community that they can go to bars. So when people post pictures of the line outside, I mean, the town I live in, y'all, I don't know if you've ever been here, but there are like 32 bars in 3 blocks in our little uptown area.
Sounds like Wisconsin.
Sounds like San Marcos.
And they're packed because they're open and the students are here. And those bars are owned by local business owners.
Mhm.
You know, we can blame anybody we want, but we should be blaming the politicians that aren't paying them to stay closed. Not the students for drinking dollar draws.
I feel like we spent a lot of fall kind of protecting our students and saying, well, wait a second, you know, like if that was me, I would be doing that too. Do you really expect students to go to college and not congregate in groups of more than 5 people? Do you really expect, right? I mean, somebody said to me, yeah, it's like sending them all into a candy shop, right? And telling them not to touch anything, right? Like I can't imagine sending my 2-year-old, 4-year-old and saying like, hey, come look at everything you have. Stand down, right? Like don't touch, stand back. It's just not reasonable. And
we haven't given them an alternative.
No.
Right.
So, you know, that I'm not mad at them. I'm not. I feel stressed and sad about, I worry about them. I worry about them getting sick. I worry about, I mean, y'all, I had students call into class from the hospital.
Yeah, me too.
Get off the phone. Like
most of mine have had it.
Yeah, I mean, it has ravaged them. And I think about the impact of that going forward. You know, potentially, we don't know a lot still about COVID, but they're going to potentially have this. Some of them are already kind of experiencing long hauler symptoms. Are they going to have this pre-existing condition? Is that going to make it more difficult for them to be employed? I mean, there are all kinds of things that I think about for them. This is an incredibly hard time. Yeah. And I think I know we could talk forever. This is like a sliver of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like the complexity of all of this. And I understand why our local districts don't want our students in their classrooms, even if they're meeting. If they're doing hybrid, I understand why they don't want our students there. And I tell my students every class, I'm like, you guys, the only way we get into the field is if we curb this. We have to flatten this curve. And that means you guys are going to have to do some hard things, except for it's not all on you, right? Like they have to work. Everybody's like, well, just do DoorDash. You know who's delivering your DoorDash? My student. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are delivering the cookies. They're the ones who are delivering the smoothies. They're the ones they're the ones working at coffee shops. Yesterday, I met some friends for a walk and they had stopped at a Speedway to get a soda or whatever. And one of my students was working at the gas station. So, you know, that they're out there and they're trying to navigate this too. And they don't have any money and they don't have any support. And they're not going to get the $600 either. So
does it go to most of them? It goes to their parents
because they're college students, so they're not probably filing their own taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents are probably claiming them. It's not always that way. I mean, obviously, there's this idea that college students that go to traditional universities like mine and Mira's are, middle class, middle income white kids. They're not. Many of them are in complex situations, but they'll not be likely to be the recipients.
Hmm.
What do you think, Will? Any questions you want to finish up with?
No, I was going over and looking at the questions list, and yeah, we did it again. So
I feel like we touched on a lot of the points there, but I just it's something, like I said, and I can kind of trace back to the first conversation that we had with y'all as to where I started to like try to see the bigger picture, because we've always said like that new teacher space is where we feel like we can offer the most help. It's like, could we develop a program that helps new teachers stay in the field? And I just love what you said about, and I'm going to steal it and I'm going to make it a professional development, but you said we're preparing the teachers for OTJ. Like, I want to create a new teacher program called On the Job Training.
Well, we'll partner with you in that.
Yeah, because it's really like, if you, because I had that mentality of, I graduated, I got this certificate, I'm ready to rock and roll. And then I get to, I mean, I can attest to the fact my first year subbing, like I got into a second grade classroom and I got eaten alive.
Mm-hmm.
So bad that I told the principal I couldn't come back the next day when they wanted me for a 3-day spell. And the principal said, I respect you for being honest that you can't do this. And then, small town kid, I wanted a job, so I moved to Houston. I was totally unprepared. Because all of my field experience had been small town rural white schools.
Yep.
I'm constantly reminding my students that it's called an initial teaching license for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think
It's almost like a learner's permit.
Yeah.
Oh.
You must have another adult in a vehicle with you at all.
Yeah. But that's where we have to be better, though, right? Because we don't. It's like a learner's permit, but then we just leave them, right? We're just like, all right,
you give a kid with a learner's permit a Ferrari.
Yeah.
And you wonder why they can't
keep it scratch free.
Right.
Just
I think too, it's really, there's a lot of debate in prep around, this emphasis on skill development and time in the classroom, being with students, being with a mentor teacher, and really just doing the act of teaching. Can we apprenticeship teaching? Is teaching a thing that you learn through doing, and is the apprenticeship model enough? Or do we also need to have some of the background, some theory, some understanding of psychology, some understanding of school structure and how we got here, about the way that kids behave, about the way that kids learned? We need some cognitive science in our prep. Like, all of those things are debatable, right? So when we were talking about alternative prep, that's also where the rub is that oftentimes in the alternative model, like the Teach for America model, is very much an apprenticeship model, where you learn by being in a classroom and doing the job. I tend to approach it more on the side of teaching my students how to think about teaching and learning and applying that to context in the field. So there's also not consensus really about how you prepare teachers. So hopefully we can talk another time about the intangible thing about this position that fascinates Mira and I, but isn't something that we know how to measure or how to identify. But also this factor of like, what is the investment side, right? If I just took a high school graduate and put them in partnership with the two of you and said, spend a year with Kyle and spend a year with Will, and then let's meet up next summer and spend a week together talking about your experience and like filling in some gaps, could that be teacher prep?
I think it.
I think it could. I love the concept, and I don't know if we were talking with you you all about this or something else, but I was like, why don't we have more field experience right at the start of when teachers are in the program, so you could actually see, like, is this actually something I want to do before I dedicate 3 years of my life to it?
Mm-hmm.
So we do, but it definitely depends on your program.
Yeah.
Mira's program and my program, they're in the field starting second semester. So whatever that means in their sequence and whenever they show up, but we have a ton of field hours, 1,500 plus.
Whoa, that's
But
way
they're not required. Like, that's not standard. I know in my teacher prep program, I had, I think, 1 practicum before student teaching, or
as
like
did
1.5 practicums before student
I
teaching.
had one practicum in student teaching, but
Yeah.
oh my God, I want to find a grant so bad. I want to find a grant so bad that I could pay a kid to spend a year with me and document and learn and see whether that would be, whether OTJ right out of high school is enough to.
Well, I'm going to say no. I don't believe it would be. I believe it could be beneficial to making the decision, but I do believe that the theoretical, that side of, like you say, the practical, like understanding the craft of teaching. I was fortunate, even though I was alt cert, to have an amazing mentor. And my mentor, I mean, plus I was an inclusion teacher, so which gave me kind of that special sweet spot to where I didn't have to focus so much on direct instruction. I could kind of be the Robin to Batman, and so I learned so much in that position working with my mentor teacher and with other seasoned veterans. And again, like a sponge, I kind of soaked up and absorbed all of the information. But again, that's me at what, 30 plus years old,
Yeah,
33
30.
years old. And so for me, it was almost a situation where it was like, okay, I know this is what I want to do. I spent a year subbing and being a paraprofessional. So going into the classroom is like, yep, this is where I want to be. I'm dedicated to it. So I had to spend a lot of time learning the theories because I wasn't taught, but I was a psychology and a sociology major. So I believe those two kind of prepared me for people. And then all I had to learn was the pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're making an argument that if you have a degree and then spend a year with you or spend a year with Kyle, so there's that maturation thing that we were accounting for earlier. And I think that's what a lot of alternative certification programs are rooted on, right? And I don't know that we can. I think there are lots of different ways that we can approach it, but the rub comes from the lasting investment. So however you get to that place, you only get better if there's an investment in you as human capital, right? And then continuing to be mentored. And that's an area that is just not going to get that investment. So then thinking about how do we build community outside of that? How do we do this on the job training, community building where mentorship is ongoing? Because I need mentors. I have mentors and I benefit from that. And I mentor other people, but I don't anticipate I get to a place where I no longer need mentorship.
It's that forever apprentice situation, and I believe that I will forever be an apprentice. My mentee is teaching me so much. So I told him, I say, I'm mentoring you, but you're also mentoring me because there are some things that you've learned. I mean, he's taught abroad. He went to teach in Africa for a year after graduating. And so that experience he's bringing to our students and to me, and I'm listening to him talk and I'm like, man, you sound like I'm talking to a 6-7 year veteran teacher already because of those experiences. And so I don't think anyone is beyond mentorship. I believe that in order to be successful in any profession, you have to have good mentors around you. multiple mentors. I have a mentor for my personal life. I have a mentor for my wife, my family life. I'm part of mentor groups for finances. I think that the idea that, once you're done, I know like in our district, we're just now graduating to the point to where we're having a 2-year mentor program. Normally our mentor program is 1 year, which to
And
me,
that year goes so fast.
oh my, I mean, we can look at this year, and my mentee and I talk about it all the time. How effective were we really? Because everything moves so fast the first semester. And I told him, I'm here for you throughout the duration. So don't think that it ends when May comes. This is a continual relationship, because you don't really get to know someone in 3 months. Let's be real. I mean, it took almost a year for me to get the strength up to talk to Kyle when I was, working side by side with him.
Yeah. I wish we gave more I wish we honored that complexity more. Rather than really thinking about mentorship as a 1-year thing. Why don't we think about it as like outcome based? Or how about we get to decide my mentor, when I moved into public school, I was an inclusive pre-K teacher, was a 4th grade teacher, 4th grade gen ed teacher. And she just would come in my room and be like, I just don't understand these little people being in this building, and how are you going to mentor me? Let me pick my own mentor. Like, she was great at showing me like where the paper reams were, and, how to ask the custodian for support. And like, she was great at school-based stuff.
All that stuff that could be on a checklist that was like, here's a document of all the things you might need.
Yeah. And I appreciated that. But I needed a mentor that I could, and the university in my area gave me that by providing me with like pedagogical and content mentors. But we have to select our mentors. The literature is really clear about that. We have to have a say in who mentors us and who we mentor, because it is a personal relationship, and that complexity has to be honored. We can't just say like, okay, we have a 1-year program, roll it out. Everything can't be structured like this. Like, we work in messy business.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I like that idea of selecting your mentors, because I think that's something that's not given to new teachers. I mean, I was a new mentor coordinator, and I never gave my mentees the option to select their mentor. I always kind of looked at personalities and said, okay, who could I pair this person with that I think would be most beneficial? But there's a power in saying, here are your choice of mentors. Go sit, interview them, talk to them, come back and let me know. Give me your top 2 people that you would want to be mentored by. That just gave me goosebumps right now, thinking of the impact that could have on a first-year teacher.
That's huge.
And thinking back to what you said about finding your group of people. I mean, just that. I mean, I've told this story 100 times on here. I had a mentor my first year that called me into his room once a month and said, "Here, sign this paper that says we met."
Yeah.
I love the man to death. Wonderful person. But he handed me a binder from his kids last year and said, his kids a year before, and said, "Hey, this is what I did." And he had been doing it for 25 years.
You probably got a little stipend for it too.
Oh, I'm sure. All right. Well, we're approaching we're approaching the 2-hour mark. So we should make sure that everybody goes out. Today is New Year's Eve, so not go out, but go somewhere outside of this Zoom call. We definitely once everybody kind of gets going on semester 2, we got to get back together and talk about this temperament and disposition piece. I think that's so important, and a little more about on-the-job training. So, Will, anything you want to end with? Anything final send off?
I just want to say thank you both. I love talking to you both. The perspective that you bring, it enhances me. And again, I took about 2 pages of notes just on things that you've given me insight on. And you mentioned this the last time we talked, and it's probably still my highlight, that dysregulated adults dysregulate kids. And I think that will sit with me because you see that evident so many places. And I think that we have to start looking at, like you say, that human capital and how we can make those individual investments to make our organism as a whole better. From I'm gonna say from pre-K to PhD, there should be a stream pipeline of consistency of how educators educate and help develop young minds, young humans. And that, again, like I say, I'm not putting anything else on my plate, but that you've given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And, I wish I would have talked to you maybe about 3 years ago, and I probably would have taken a different path in my dissertation. But I have to say that you've really given a lot today. And I thank you. And I know our listeners will be able to go through this. And once we break it down into probably 3 or 4 episodes,
Yeah.
that we'll be, they'll be able to glean from it and be able to conceptualize that big picture, not just from prep to classroom, but also from pre-service teachers all the way through the process of what we're doing in our learning. And I think that's an invaluable resource you've provided for our listeners. So thank you both for taking your time and doing this with us.
We love talking to you. So thank you for having us.